Hello, my good friends. Welcome to another episode of 30 Albums for 30 Years, 1964 through 1994, where we take a look at the most impactful albums during those years. So it's 30 albums for each one of those years, totaling 900 albums. I don't know if we get there, but we are certainly going to try, or I'm certainly going to try. I don't really know why I use this we business, because it's basically just me for the most part. But anyway, today's album is a good one. It's the Byrds, Mr. Tambourine Man, recorded January 20th. At least two tracks were the title track and the B-side to that track. And then the boys went back into the studio March 8th through April 22nd, 1965. And the album was released on June 21st, 1965. Before we get into the album, I want to mention just a few things. We have some new listeners. We have some people now listening in Switzerland and South Africa. I think that's totaling now 32 different countries where people are listening to the program. And one of my biggest fans and biggest supporters of the show is actually my father, Fred Sweet. So he's been asking when I'm going to mention him on an episode. So I'm going to dedicate this one to him. He wasn't necessarily my musical muse. He did have a guitar laying around, strummed a few chords, never quite understood some of the music I listened to, but was always supportive, is always supportive. So this is an episode for him. And let's get into it. The Byrds, Mr. Tambourine Man. And yes, thank you, Dad, for all of your support. Let's get into it. So let's learn a little bit about these flying creatures known as the Byrds. If you take the Beatles, Bob Dylan songs, tight harmonies, and the twang of an electric 12-string guitar, you put it in a musical blender, you come out with the Byrds' early recordings. The group was flying high in 1965, and the Byrds are often cited as folk rock pioneers. They actually were just high, to be quite honest. And the group's original lineup began with Roger McGuinn, who was at the time known as Jim McGuinn. He changed his name in 1967. He's the principal vocalist, and he played 12-string electric guitar. I actually had an opportunity to meet Roger McGuinn at Monmouth University, where I work. He did a bit of a clinic and a small performance, and I got to thank him for the great music. It was a cool moment for me. And then you add Gene Clark on vocals and tambourine, and David Crosby on rhythm guitars and vocals. All three of these guys were rooted in folk music, each working on their own thing, mostly at coffee houses, the folk coffee house scene. McGuinn was also working as a professional songwriter in New York City. In 1964, McGuinn, like many Americans, became interested in the Beatles' music, and he began performing their music acoustically. While playing at the Troubadour Club in West Hollywood, McGuinn met Gene Clark, and then the two formed a duo where they played mainly folk covers, Beatles covers, and some originals. Then David Crosby met the duo at the Troubadour and began harmonizing with McGuinn and Clark. Now, David Crosby, if you don't know, is one of the great harmony singers. I mean, honestly, this guy could harmonize a fart. He's that good. Like, he could just put a voice to anything. So the duo, with the help of Crosby, then became a trio, and the three went out as a band known as Jet Set. So now as Jet Set, the group made a few demos and found a manager, but they mainly remained grounded on the runway. Then they hired drummer Michael Clark, and he was mainly recruited for his good looks. In fact, he really only played congas at this point, and not even really as a professional. He didn't even own a drum kit, but he had good hair, which was important to the group. It was enough to get him in. I'm serious. In fact, management didn't think Clark was even skilled enough to record, and when the group made a new demo in 1964, a session player was brought in to handle the drum tracks. Later that year, the band got an unreleased copy of Bob Dylan's Mr. Tambourine Man, and they totally rearranged the song. It was also around this time when McGuinn bought his signature Rickenbacker electric 12-string guitar. Michael Clark got a professional drum kit, a Ludwig drum set, and Gene Clark, not related to Michael, acquired his Gretsch Tennessean guitar, which eventually Crosby took from him, leaving Clark to play the tambourine. only the tambourine really, which I find pretty hysterical. Of course he sang. Now, one big issue was that Jet Set was still missing a bass player. So to fill out the Jet Set crew, they hired Chris Hillman, a country bluegrass mandolinist, to play bass. So now we have a drummer who's learning to play drums on the job, and a bassist who's doing the same, and a guitarist who is now playing the tambourine. Then, of all people, jazz trumpeter Miles Davis helped secure a record deal at Columbia Records for the Byrds late in 1964. McGuinn explains this. I never met Miles, but one of the people in his management group knew our producer. McGuinn says his daughter had heard about us, and then Miles encouraged people at Columbia to take a chance on us. He told them that it was music for young people that they were listening to rather than what was on their label. So they signed us and gave us a one-song deal. At this time, they changed their name to the Byrds, Byrds, purposely misspelling it the same way that the Beatles misspelled their name. And by the way, Byrds eat hundreds of metric tons of Beatles yearly. And while the group didn't necessarily devour the Beatles, they did give them some serious competition in 1965. On January 20th, 1965, the Byrds first began recording for Columbia Records. Their first song was one of their biggest hits, Mr. Tambourine Man, and the only Byrd trusted to participate on the track was Roger Jim McGuinn, at least as an instrumentalist. The rest of the group was replaced by session musicians known as the Wrecking Crew, very talented musicians. The label liked the idea of using session players for the rest of the album, but the Byrds squawked at the idea, and their small flock was allowed to play on the record. Although there is some speculation that session musicians were brought in to enhance their tracks. The Byrds then swarmed around the Sunset Strip to play regularly at Ciro's Late Disc Club. Hollywood celebrities like Peter Fonda, Jack Nicholson, Sonny and Cher all began to attend their shows with regularity, and there was a buzz around the Byrds. And the bubblings of the first West Coast wave of the hippie counterculture began with these long-haired Byrds. Alright, so moving right along, Mr. Tambourine Man, the song becomes a huge hit, reaching number 1, and the term folk rock begins to be used to describe their music. It's kind of the first time we hear this term, folk rock. In June of 1965, the Byrds released their much anticipated debut album, Mr. Tambourine Man, and the album reached number 6 in the US and 7 in the UK. The record contains several Bob Dylan covers, Gene Clark originals, covers by Pete Seeger, Jackie DeShannon, and Ross Parker. Now, part of the appeal of the group and the album is their vocals. They have great vocal harmonies, and at times, McGuinn, Clark, Crosby, and Hillman switched lead vocal duties. Pretty rare for a band to do that. And people also took to the group's style of dressing, which included flamboyant garb, mop-top haircuts, and McGuinn's signature granny-style glasses. On stage, the group, who was likely always high on weed, didn't move around much, and their performance seemed more focused on the music than on the actual stage show. In fact, their heavy usage often made their performances less than perfect. That's their heavy drug usage. And critics began to kind of take notice. But reviews were varied. Some hailed the Byrds as America's answer to the Beatles, and the band went on to tour following the release of Mr. Tambourine Man, which included a tour of England, and later in the year, the group recorded their second hit album, Turn, 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 which we will discuss in a later broadcast. All right, so let's do it. Let's drop the needle on side number 1, track number 1. The tune is Mr. Tambourine Man. It was a hit song that broke the Byrds from their nest into the hearts of young music fans. This is the first of several Dylan covers on the album. Now, no disrespect to Bob Dylan, but I've often contested that Dylan songs are often best represented when they are performed by other artists not named Bob Dylan. Sorry, Bob. Like the Byrds, for example. Bob Dylan included the song on his recording Bring It All Back Home. That's the record, and we've talked about that one. It was released in March of 1965. The Byrds version was released not long after, April, as a single. As the introduction mentions, the recording features only one Byrd playing, Roger McGuinn. Wrecking Crew session players like Jerry Cole on guitar, Larry Kutchner on electric bass, Leon Russell on electric piano, and Hal Blaine on drums were brought in to perform on this piece. The Byrds' reworking of the tune includes a cool guitar intro and some Beach Boy-esque vocal harmonies sung by McGuinn, Crosby, Clark, and Tillman. The group also scaled down Dylan's lyrics from 5 verses to only 2 verses. Dylan's version was roughly 5.5 minutes long, and the Byrds flew in and out quickly with 2.5 minute long version, making their single more radio friendly. The song peaked at number 1 on Billboard's Hot 100s list and number 1 on the UK singles charts, making it the first recording of Bob Dylan's songs to reach number 1 on any pop chart. Dylan couldn't do it. It was the Byrds who gave Dylan a number 1 song. Check it out. It's a classic, Mr. Tambourine Man. Track number 2 is my favorite Byrd song. I'll Feel a Whole Lot Better is the name. The piece was written by Gene Clark, and he handles the lead vocal responsibilities. During an interview, Clark has said the following: "There was a girlfriend I had known at the time when we were playing at Ciro's. It was a weird time in my life because everything was changing so fast, and I knew we were becoming popular. This girl was a funny girl. She was kind of strange little girl, and she started to bother me a lot. And I just wrote the song, I'm going to feel a whole lot better when you're gone. And that's all it was, but I wrote it within a few minutes." The piece features driving drums and bass grooves, fantastic vocal harmonies, and a McGuinn guitar solo. The word probably in the chorus is of interest. It is as if the narrator isn't quite sure he will really feel a whole lot better when she's gone, but he probably will. The song was initially released as a B-side to All I Really Want to Do, but did manage to chart, although weekly, at 103rd on the Billboard charts, and it continued to gain popularity throughout the years. I'll feel a whole lot better after you check out this song. Next up is Spanish Harlem Incident, another Bob Dylan tune that was initially released on his 1964 record, Another Side of Bob Dylan. I featured that record in season number 1. Check it out if you haven't already. The song is the second of 4 Bob Dylan covers on the album. Take notice of the instrumental multi-layering. The group's harmonies are not quite as crisp on this one, but they are still mostly impressive. The song is just another example of how skilled the Byrds were at reinterpreting Bob Dylan's music. McGuinn handles the lead vocals on this one, and of course his electric 12-string guitar adds to the overall vibe. You Won't Have to Cry is our next track, and it comes from Gene Clark and Roger McGuinn. They wrote that one with lyrics like, "You know, it makes me sad to see you feel so bad. And there's no reason to feel blue because of what he says to you." There is really no wonder that they chose to borrow lyrics from Bob Dylan, because those are not fantastic. And it is clear on this recording that the Byrds were attempting to sound a little bit like the Beatles on this one. The Byrds did not fly particularly high with this attempt. You make your own decision. You won't have to cry, but you do have to listen to this track. Check it out. I am certainly happy to be here with you, and that is also the name of our next track. Here With You was written by Gene Clark, and it dates back to 1964. It's one of the stronger tracks on the album and foreshadows the group's later move to a more psychedelic sound, as they reused the opening on this one for one of their most important hits, 8 Miles High, which was released in 1966. The vocal harmonies on this one are great, the bass line works perfectly, and the 12-string guitar continues to give their Byrds their unique identity. It really is a hidden gem, a song that should have been a hit, but it remained unhatched on the pop markets. Here with you. The final track on side number 1 is The Bells of Rimini, which comes from the Welsh poet Indris Davis and folk legend Pete Seeger. Seeger first released the song in 1958. The work was inspired by a 1920s coal mining disaster. Once again, the vocal harmonies are the main feature on the track. McGuinn also impresses with his signature style guitar solo. The lyrics ask, "Is there hope for the future?" All right, cats, let's do this thing. Let's flip the record, drop the needle on side number 2. The first track is All I Really Want to Do. It's the first song from Bob Dylan's Another Side of Bob Dylan record. The song was written in 1964, and it was inspired by his breakup with then-girlfriend Suze Rotolo. The Byrds version was their second single after Mr. Tambourine Man, reaching number 40 in the U.S. The group's management rushed out the single when it was revealed that Cher was also about to release her cover version. Now, Cher's version did better. It reached number 15 in the US, but in the UK, things were reversed. The Byrds version did better. It reached number 4, and Cher's reached number 9. The Byrds completely reinterpreted this piece to make it more Beatlesque. McGuinn sings lead on most of the track, but then songbird David Crosby flies in to sing the middle 8, and then McGuinn returns. All I really want to do is check this one out. All right, I enjoy saying this. Side number 2, track number 2. I don't know why that brings me joy, but it does. I'm going to do it again. Side number 2, track number 2 is the song I Knew I'd Want You. And typically I like side number 2, track number 2. I did it again. Songs. They seem to be good songs usually, and this is certainly the case here. I Knew I'd Want You is another Gene Clark original. It served as the B-side to Mr. Tambourine Man. The song dates back to Gene Clark's time with Jet Set. It sounds somewhat like the Moody Blues hit Nights in White Satin, which comes later. And the song comes from the same January 1965 session as Mr. Tambourine Man, and therefore the only Byrd playing on the track is McGuinn. The rest were studio musicians. Although there is some speculation that Chris Hillman may have played the bass and Crosby may have strummed some guitar. Nevertheless, the song is performed in a 6/8 or a 3/4 waltz rhythm, and it is one of the album highlights. I knew I'd want you to check this one out. Our next track is It's No Use, which was penned by Clark and McGuinn, and it showcases an early version of the Byrds' psychedelic rock experimentations. It's really a fantastic album cut with a solid melody, clever chords, strong guitar works, a formidable groove, and great vocal harmonies. I really dig this tune. It's no use talking about it anymore. Let's just check it out. Track number 3 of side number 2. It's No Use. Don't Doubt Yourself, Babe. It's another strong hidden album cut. It's track number 4. This one's got a country rock element to it, and it includes lots of tambourine. So if you're a fan of a tambourine, here you go. Now take notice of the Bo Diddley rhythm that I've talked about frequently on this program in our evaluation of albums from 1964 and 1965. It keeps coming back. It's that bum, 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 ba-dum, bum. Now special mention should also be given to Chris Hillman's bass playing on this track and McGuinn's heavily affected guitar solo. The song was written by American singer and songwriter Jackie DeShannon, who had several hit songs. She is best known as the singer on What the World Needs Now Is Love, and is the writer of the song Betty Davis Eyes. Don't doubt yourself, babe. Track number 5 of side number 2 is Chimes of Freedom. It's the fourth and final Bob Dylan cover on the record. The song was originally featured on his record, Another Side of Bob Dylan, and the song was the last track the Byrds recorded for this album. Now, the session was full of conflict. David Crosby refused to sing on the track for some reason. Now, he was kind of known as a bit of a pain in the ass. And there was a fight, supposedly, between Crosby and Jim Dixon. That's the album producer. And they began to fight. Dixon supposedly tackled Crosby and sat on his chest until he relented to sing. And as a result, he was included on the track. And, of course, he sang beautifully. Chimes of Freedom. All right, the final track on the original LP. Now, later releases, CD releases, Spotify releases, what have you, have many alternate tracks, so you should check those out as well. But for our purposes, we always deal with the original. And track number 6 is We'll Meet Again, which puts a bow on the package that was Mr. Tambourine Man, with the lyrics, "We'll meet again," and you certainly will. The public met the Byrds repeatedly, in fact, as they continued to release more and more records. The song comes from English songwriters Ross Parker and Norman Keane. It was originally recorded in 1939 by Vera Lynn. The song inspired the 1943 musical film We'll Meet Again, same name, where Lynn played the lead role. It is an interesting choice for an album closer, a song from 1939. We'll Meet Again. Hey, we did it. Made it to the end of the record. Certainly better for it. Let's lift the needle off the album. Let's put it away. And let's discuss. So Mr. Tambourine Man is a classic, and it was incredibly impactful in creating a culture for future folk rock recordings by reinterpreting the music of Bob Dylan and others, while also showcasing the songwriting of Gene Clark and Roger McGuinn. The Byrds' obvious admiration for the Beatles and the harmonies of the Beach Boys helped create a perfect blend that was geared towards the taste of many American youths in 1965. Through their unique sounds, coming from McGuinn's 12-string guitar, and with album cuts like Here With You and It's No Use, the Byrds also gave a preview to a move towards a later 1960s psychedelic rock creation. In addition to the support from the general public, critics and reviewers also mainly supported the album. The Rolling Stones album guide has given it a perfect 5-star rating. The Byrds were included in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1991. All right, there you have it. I hope you enjoyed today's program, and I hope you enjoyed the program in general. So to learn more about it, you can go to 30albumsfor30years.com. Also, you can check out my book, A History of American Music, 1750 to 1950, an origin story. That's available through Kendall Hunt Publishing. Once again, I want to thank my dad, Fred Sweet, for listening to the program. I hope you enjoyed today's episode as well. I think you probably like the Byrds. I'm not quite sure, but I'm sure you'll let me know after this one. So anyway, let's keep this music alive, and I look forward to speaking with you again soon. Have a wonderful day.